Hello everyone. So, you want to learn politics, but you don't know where to start. Well, this video is for you. Today we're talking about Mimir's essential guide to politics, and this is going to be a list of literature that I think everyone should read at least once in their lives, especially when they're forming their political ideologies and how they view the world. So, this list consists of multiple tiers of thought, and I'll go through each one and describe each book. I don't recommend that you suddenly go out and buy every book on this list. Kind of go through it as you please, and each individual person will have different tastes. Some of these books are a bit more philosophical than political, some a bit more economical than political, but they all tie in very closely together. Now, if I missed a book, don't worry. I'm still making revisions to this list, but this list is the absolute essentials needed to form political thought, and then there will be an optional section at the end where I'll get into that soon. So let's start off with Tier 1. These are the books that everyone, everywhere, no matter who you are, you should read these books if you're going to start talking politics in any way, shape, or form. If you haven't read even one of these books, then I don't think you have any ability to talk politics at all. So, the first one is, of course, Bastiat's The Law. Very important book. Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, also a very important book. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, Machiavelli's The Prince, George Orwell's 1984, and Animal Farm. It's recommended that you read these two together. Plato's The Republic, Smith's The Wealth of Nations. Of course, this goes in a little bit more into economics, but it's the foundation of modern free market capitalist thought, so pretty important to understanding how our economies work today. And of course, the New Testament, the King James Bible version. If you haven't read the Bible, you need to. Whether you're a Christian or not, you need to read it. It is an important cultural work and is the foundation of a lot of philosophy, a lot of politics, and a lot of economics in the Western world. It's key in understanding that religion has played and continues to this day to play a key part in politics. So we have to read this if we're going to understand it. Now, I haven't read the Bible in a long time, but I'm slugging through it, so you should too. Now, once you're a bit more familiar with the books in that tier, we move on to Tier 2. And for those of you who already have a relatively solid foundation in politics, you might start off with Tier 2 instead. Now, starting from the top, we have Aristotle's Politics. We have Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion. We have Capital by Karl Marx. Now, this is a one that I get a lot of shit for putting on this list. If you want to argue against communism or the more extreme forms of leftist political ideology, you have to read the source material. You cannot argue against them if you do not understand their material. You need to be able to point out the flaws from the very writers, the foundational writers of their belief system. If you can't do that, then there's no use trying to argue against them. It's a long book. Just slog through it. I always recommend taking notes when it comes to books like these when you're trying to learn something important. So just struggle through it, take a couple months, kind of throw it in your schedule wherever you can, but it is important. Now, John Maynard Keynes' General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. John Locke's Two Treatises of Government. Machiavelli again, The Discourses on Livy. John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. Montesquieu, The Spirit of Laws. Paine's The Rights of Man, Rousseau's The Social Contract, St. Augustine's The City of God, and Thucydides' The Peloponnesian War. I'm terrible at Greek names, and I'm terrible at Greek philosophy, but it's important in understanding the tradition of the Western world. Now, all of these books are slightly more advanced than the average person would be comfortable with when it comes to politics or economics, but they're still some of the more foundational pieces to Western political and economic thought in the world today. Now, for those of you who are much more familiar with politics and you have a foundational ideology that you ascribe to, you might jump all the way to Tier 3. But at this point, it's not recommended for anyone who is not familiar with politics to jump right into this. These books are a little bit more difficult to read and understand if you don't already have some founding principles in which you understand governance, the law, and in some cases the economy. Also, there's a little bit more historical works in this list. So let's go from the top. This is a joint book from Adorno and Horkheimer. This is the Dialectic of Enlightenment. We have Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, Hegel's Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, parts 1 and 2, Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, Heidegger's Being and Time, 1962, Hume's Treatise of Human Nature, Kant's Critique of Practical Reason and Critique of Pure Reason. These are two separate books that need to be read back-to-back together. Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling, Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil and Twilight of the Idols. This is another set of two books that need to be read back-to-back or together. Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation, Spinoza's Theological Political Treatise, The Black Book of Communism, and finally, all volumes of the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Now, most people are familiar with Marcus Aurelius and his Meditations, but it's better to save this book when you already have a decently founded perspective on politics and economics and philosophy and things like this, because you can't really apply it if you have a more abstract view of the world, especially historically, and how you can apply it to your life. It requires a slightly higher level of thinking. I know it's kind of a meme book at this point, but I think it's still important for everyone to read through it. Now, if you're struggling for whatever reason to read some of these books and you're just trying to get to the real meat and bones, I know it's tough to get through Hume and Heidegger and Kant and Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. Maybe you can leave these towards the end, but by simply reading, you will of course improve your vocabulary and never be ashamed to ask questions. Now, I haven't read every single book in this list. I have them all ready to read when I'm available. But if you have any questions about a theory or an idea or a section of a book, ask me, ask a friend, go online. Don't just read the Spark Notes, but maybe once you've finished reading a book, go through it again. Read what the discussions online about this book are. You should never feel ashamed of learning. If there's a concept you don't understand or a set of words that are a bit outside your vocabulary, there's plenty for me. Trust me, this sort of older English writing style is a bit out of my league at some points. But never feel ashamed to ask questions. The point of this list is for everyone to get a good foundation in politics. It's not the most interesting thing in the world, but it's important for those of you, especially who watch my channel, to get an idea of where my perspective comes from. Now then, once you're very familiar with these books, if you have a strong background in reading political and economic literature, you're more than likely, if you've been following this list, going to lean somewhere towards the right wing. So at this point comes the optional Tier 4, and these books become a little bit more ideological than the others. However, if you're interested in a subject, if you're interested in understanding the foundation of the three tiers or wings of the right, then you need somewhere to point to. So if you're interested in reading about the libertarian right, we're not talking about big L libertarians or the Libertarian Party in politics or minarchists or anything like that. I'm talking right libertarians, right-wing libertarians. A couple of books that you might want to check out if you're interested in this are Hayek's The Constitution of Liberty, Hoppe's Democracy, the God That Failed, very important book, Paul's Liberty Defined, Rand's Atlas Shrugged, of course, and Murray Rothbard's For a New Liberty. This will give you a foundation of the sort of libertarian thought. Now, I could throw in another 100 libertarian books if you're more interested in this. There's plenty of free ones on the Mises Institute. Even if you're not a fan of libertarianism, still go in, read these books, read what they have to say, analyze it, and maybe you will learn something. It's particularly good for understanding how free market economies work and how it can be applied successfully. Now, here is a subject that I'm less well read on, and I'm very excited to get into reading these books. This is the reactionary right. These are the monarchists in the right wing. So if you're curious about monarchy and where this perspective comes from, here's a list of books you can start with. Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France, Carlyle's On Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History, Eco's Foucault's Pendulum, Eliot's Christianity and Culture, Essay on the Generative Principle of Political Constitutions, Julius Evola's Men Among the Ruins, and Ride the Tiger, read these two back to back, Filmer's Patriarcha, Guénon's The Reign of Quantity, and Kaczynski's Industrial Society and Its Future. Now, I know Theodore Kaczynski is not a monarchist, but he is still a reactionary, and he brings up some interesting points when we talk about returning to the older systems of human governance. So I think it's important, and if you haven't read any of his writings, I think it's interesting to read and get a perspective. Now, the final tree of right-wing thought, if you're interested in right-wing socialism, here are some books that you need to read. Cioran's A Short History of Decay, Condranu's For My Legionaries, Dugin's The Fourth Political Theory, Joseph Goebbels' Kampf um Berlin, or The Struggle for Berlin, and various writings. Mein Kampf, of course, Mosley's The Alternative, Mussolini's Political and Social Doctrine of Fascism, the 1932 one, the National Socialist Economic Program of 1932. This is actually a pamphlet, but it kind of helps you understand the more economic side of the NSDAP. Read Ragnar's Might is Right, Schmidt's Political Theology, Solzhenitsyn's 200 Years, Sorel's Reflections on Violence, Spengler's The Decline of the West, and this one's very important, but it is a black pill book, so be careful, and Varang's Imperium, 1948. Now, this is written under a pseudonym, but that's probably what you'll find it under. This is also a black pill book. Just keep in mind, if you're susceptible to nihilistic thought, be very careful with these books. All right, so that does it for the essential political books and treatises that I recommend everyone reads. Hopefully you've been following along with the beautiful images I have yet to create and put on screen, but all the covers should be on there. Most of these books are going to be kind of hard to find. Some of them will be on Amazon, some of them may be on a third-party seller. You might even find them at your local Goodwill or charity bookstore. But do not be afraid to go out there and look for these books, no matter what kind of looks you might get. Also, keep in mind that for some of the more further, what you might call extreme right-wing books, there are censored versions, especially Solzhenitsyn's 200 Years. Look for a completely unredacted version of that book. It takes out, I think the redacted version takes out like 16 different chapters, and you're left with the shell of what the original book is. So definitely be on the look for that. Try and find an original edition translated into whatever language you prefer. Like I said, this list is constantly evolving and I'm adding things, but keep in mind, if you want to recommend me a book, make sure it's a critical piece of literature. If it's something a bit more esoteric or a bit something more for someone who's more experienced with that wing of political thought, make sure to mention that, because this should be only the essentials for understanding whatever it is, especially in the introduction to politics. Politics can be a very overwhelming, kind of daunting task for new people to get into. I understand this. So we try and keep things a little bit simpler around here for the newbies. Well, I'm kind of running out of time here. If you'd like to talk to me, you can leave a comment down below, find me on Twitter, and thanks for listening.